Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Bingley Talks Politics with me, Mr Booth and Mr Cook.
Hello.
And we've now got three students. We've obviously got Finn from Year 12, who
Hello.
seems to be a regular. Hello Finn.
Hello.
And we've also got Isla and Eva. Hello Isla.
Hi.
Hello Eva.
Hi.
And we've got both of those Year 10 students, so we're growing the team here. And today we're going to be talking about lots of issues to do with voting. We'll start off straight away with first-time voting and how people are going to decide to vote for a particular party, what things they're going to take into consideration. Now, Finn, we've just talked about how you might just miss the next general election in terms of voting, just by talk us through that again.
So the next general election's meant to be on the 2nd of May 2024, and I turn 18 on the 3rd of May 2024 at 1:52 in the morning, so I'll miss out by 1 hour and 52 minutes.
We think it's probably going to be held before, but that's a real...
Might be next year.
It's a shame. Yeah, it could be sooner, couldn't it? In which case we'll get, for the next one, you get to vote earlier. Yeah. But that's a frustrating thing for someone who's obviously really interested in the issues and who's in power. So if you are voting for the first time, how do you decide on who to vote for?
Well, it depends. I suppose a lot of it depends on where you come from. You know, it might be a lot of your voting might be influenced by your parents and your parents' socio-economic situation. So, your parents might be particularly poor. In which case, if you're poor, you generally tend to vote Labour more than Conservatives. You might be from different ethnicities. You might be from different geographical locations, in which case you might have more of a persuasion to vote for a particular party. It's sort of those underlying factors, really, of your first experience of life that define how your outlook on the world is and how that then in turn affects the way in which you vote.
Eva, what do you think? So you're Year 10,
Yeah.
so it's a few years, but it'll go fairly quickly.
Yeah.
What do you think decides if you're going to, for the first-time voters?
I think that a lot of your own beliefs are influenced by, like Finn said, your family or your socio-economic situation. But even your own beliefs can be swayed by people around you. But it's not often that you're voting for a party. Sometimes it's that you're voting for a certain person. So.
Isla, what do you think?
So you've got the media, and I think that's very important, like now, social media, and then that's why it's really important that you've
Do you think young people are looking at social media quite a lot when deciding to vote?
Yeah, I think...
Talk us through what happens there then. Is that particular messages you'll get sent through, certain Instagram or Twitter, or how is that working?
Seeing like your friends' beliefs, and then you get diverted more to who they're following, who they might follow a certain party, and then you get drifted away. And that's why it's so important that we've got the BBC, unbiased news outlets, to give us just facts.
So the media sounds quite important then in what determines how people vote. There's a lot of influences out there on how people vote, and maybe we could come up with what are the biggest ones. We've already talked about family and parents. You mentioned beliefs, Eva, and then how they're influenced and shaped, and you brought media into it. What else is there then that influences the way people vote, particularly when the first or second time?
I think that you can go to, if you know where to look, then it's quite easy to find things online, but like Kyle said, it's finding the unbiased sources like the BBC or the government website with equal information on all of the parties. So.
And I think also looking at media, that's not just the policies that the party has for the next time you're voting, that's also what they've done while they've been in power for the last 4 years, or what they've done while you've been alive up until that point. And I think that's played a big part. That's why we've had most turnover of prime ministers, like possibly ever.
That's a really good point, yeah.
It's to do with the media just being more out there.
Do you think the media, overall, positive influence, negative influence? What are we thinking there, Finn?
It sort of depends, doesn't it? Because I know in Italy, the longest serving Prime Minister there, Silvio Berlusconi, he owns the media.
Yeah.
He owns all of the newspapers, all of the television outlets. So all he does is he just spews out, coverage which supports him and supports his message. Whereas here it's very much, it's unbiased. We've got, is it Ofqual? I can't remember. Is that what called?
Ofcom, is it?
Ofcom, yeah, that controls, the media output. So it's, and then obviously you've got the rise of social media, fake news. So that has quite a significant effect, I'd say.
I mean, you two seen a lot of fake stuff.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's easy to get swept away, especially in Instagram and Twitter, in false things. And if you have friends on social media who follow certain people, then the algorithm definitely directs you towards that. So it's steering yourself away and realising what is and isn't fake.
Yeah, it's a concern it's a concern I would have just from some of the sort of random questions I get asked as a teacher, about whether this is true or what do you think of that, and I'm like, oh, hang on a minute, where on earth have you got this idea from? And when you unpick that, you find out that perhaps it's not the most reliable source of information, and it's sort of weaving your way through that. But that's, I suppose, the same issue. Is that more prevalent for younger people? Because you're on social media more, you use phones more, and is that a fair comment?
Yeah, I think that it's easier for younger people to be swept away by that and, be exploited in that way.
So if you are thinking about who to vote for, and you get into, you're 14, 15, 16, 17, you're becoming more interested in just generally, and you don't have to be massively interested in lots of political things, but you're aware that your vote might matter and some of the government does might affect you, and there are things that are quite important that you might want to have your say on through voting. It's you mentioned, Eva, that people have these beliefs, these values. I mean, where are they coming from? Are they developed? Are they changing? Is that from family?
I think largely it can be from yourself and what your own moral compass tells you if you're interested in the subject. But if you're not, it's very easy to be passive and just accept what your parents say is right, especially if you come from a single household where both of your parents agree with the same thing.
Right, so there's not much discussion or debate and things like that.
In certain households there can be just a this is right and this is wrong, whereas if you have parents who vote differently, it's a lot easier to speak to both of those parents about their points of view and kind of build your own from different points rather than just taking one view.
Finn, what do you think on that?
I think that's a really good point. I mean, I suppose I've been brought up in a household where, my mum and dad, they share the same views, basically, more or less, politically. But I could very well, over lockdown, I sort of decided to look into ideology, look into what I do and don't believe in, and I changed my mind, only slightly, but, I think that's right. If you're not politically aware, and especially because in Britain we don't have that political education, we don't, teach, apart from at A level, about politics, you're probably just going to inherit the views of your parents. That's the most likely thing, because you're not really taught to question that.
Yeah, it's a difficult thing, sort of teaching. I don't want to get into this too much. Teaching party politics in schools is quite a difficult thing, because you can be quite easily accused and not allowed to lead pupils to a particular point of view. So it is an interesting area there. So there's lots of issues here. Once you've got your beliefs, is it then you match to a political party? Is that a process that goes on?
I think you have to kind of find the best fit for you. I don't think there's one size fits all for each set of beliefs, but I think it's what most closely aligns with you is what you would vote for.
And where do you get that information about parties from?
It's quite... I think that it's always quite drilled in that Labour is the more socialist, Conservative is more further to the right.
You're just kind of aware of that happens over time in the, as you say, everything you've said, maybe your family, maybe media.
Yeah.
I've got a question for Mr. Cook, sat there.
Look at me.
Yes, look at you indeed. Mr. Cook, have you ever read Party Manifesto?
I have done, but I'm quite a boring person, which is why I read Party Manifestos.
I've read one or two,
Yeah.
but I don't actually read them generally in the run-up to elections.
Well, I don't read them to necessarily decide who to vote for, which is interesting. Normally it's just to basically get the details of, like, right, this is what they believe in and this is what they're promising. But I find with me, I've made up my mind. It's one thing I was going to ask the year 10s, to what extent ideology has actually influences you guys at this point, or whether you're still in kind of the figuring out as you go along phase.
Have you changed much? Have you been quite... I'm going to guess even that you might not have changed from... I taught you in year 8. I don't know. You seem to... Yeah?
I agree with my mum's beliefs more than I do my dad's, very much so. So, also my mum's more open to talking about politics. I think that often who you vote for can be a really hushed up, stigmatised topic, so it's important that you've got like parents and people who are willing to talk to you about that, which I think it's helpful forming your own beliefs if you've got people who are open to talk about their own views with you.
And Ida, what do you think? Have you had sort of ideas that have grown, changed, or they just got stronger, or...?
I think I've always kind of been between two certain parties. It's like, you know, you like a bit of one policy, you like a bit of the other. It's quite difficult in that
quite
sense.
tricky, yeah.
And I guess it's quite good to be adaptive sometimes, just to look at it objectively and make your decision that way.
I think it's quite interesting, this, because we're going into quite a lot of detail. We've mentioned party manifestos. I'm guessing it's a really low percentage of the population. I mean, like really low.
I think there was
that
a study
bothers to
on it.
read. I mean, what's the percentage? Do you know?
Off the top of my head, I don't know. But
Mr.
I'm pretty
Cook,
sure
yeah.
there is studies on this that
Yeah,
show
there will
people
be,
really
won't there?
don't read them that
They
often.
don't, do they?
No.
But we're kind of right, they go through the news and we kind of pick that up, don't we? Particularly if it's an election when we're bombarded with information. So we know the greatest hits of the manifesto, don't we, or the headlines, although there's always some interesting detail. And that sounds great, and it sounds really sort of rational and logical. But I'm just going to throw a few things in here. Last election, 2019, yeah. It's got Boris Johnson, I think, was the leader of the... Sorry if I think he became... Yeah. Get Brexit done.
Yeah.
So people think that's what won the Tories the election. Now, obviously we can debate this, maybe there was more to it. But it's all very good looking in this detail. Is that more important for people, for generally, just these simple things? Get Brexit done. In the 2016 referendum, not an election, but it was, take back control. So we seem to be in this sort of three-word catchphrase era. That's really important. Finn, what do you think? Are they really that powerful, these slogans?
Well, they sort of are, yeah, because one of the complaints you always get about politics is people saying, "Oh, well, I don't understand it. It's all so complex. What's this? What's that? It's all such a minefield." And they never really attempt to actually understand it. And I think when you come in with slogans like that, it just makes it all so clear. Boris Johnson is going to get Brexit done. What's Jeremy Corbyn going to do? Oh, he's just going to nationalise the air or something. Something like that. People don't understand the terminology of politics, and when you come in with those slogans, it's captivating, really. When actually Johnson's manifesto, it really was just the same, but people wanted change, and that slogan looked like it promised change. Those three words did, and so that's what I believe Get Brexit Done was the thing that made the deal for him.
Maybe we could suggest some catchy slogans there's good jobs for you here, really. I'd imagine these people, well, I know they get paid quite a lot of money, the campaign strategists, don't they?
Yeah.
And they come up with these at big meetings and they come out with these phrases. So if you think of any, for the next election, it's always...
Morrissey for PM.
Yeah, well, that's when we've... it sounds a bit... It's certainly dated and it's a sort of sexist quote in the certain context, but it was Norman... We like quotes, don't we, Mr. Cook, on Bingley Talks Politics. Norman Tebbit, who was a Conservative politician from the 80s mainly, big Thatcherite, said, if you can give a man down the pub 3 reasons to vote for you, that's going to win the election. kind of works in a way, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Simplicity.
Links into
Yeah.
populism as well.
So it's got to be simple.
Yeah.
And also helps people, when you mention populism, it's interesting, there's almost like a reaction against the political class and tradition, isn't it? And so people just want simple answers.
Yeah.
What do you understand populism to be, and what's going on there?
It's just appealing, doing what you think the public's going to like as a politician, and judging the climate at the time and going with that. Making things vague and generalised.
So it's almost like a politician reading what the public might want, and then reflecting it back to them, and that's popular. And so these slogans do play a role. This simplicity does play a role. Okay, does that suggest then that this is quite a controversial thing? People don't often know what they are voting for.
Yeah.
Eva, what do you think on that? You look like you've
I think
got a view on this.
it's really easy to accept simplistic slogans such as "Get Brexit Done," and rather than read into it for yourself. I think people who aren't interested in politics, they don't want to make the time for it, so they just kind of accept what people have said about like the slogans, and they just kind of believe that to be the entire like party manifesto, if that makes sense.
It's a shame, that, isn't it?
Yeah.
One of my more controversial, it's not really my idea, but it's an idea that I like, and Mr Cook's heard this before, is we're going to talk about the voting age probably today, but a radical idea with the voting age is to lower it to 5 years old. Yeah? Interesting. Right, go with me on this one. And one of the advantages of that is that will put an onus on families to do more political education, because people don't like to talk about politics. Politics is boring, politics is this, politics is that. A message I try to say, well, yeah, certain aspects of it, like anything, when you talk about it a lot, might not appeal to everyone. But because of its influence, and sometimes it's influence that people don't even realise, perhaps it's more important that people in families, in smaller groups, away from classrooms and workplaces, talk about it. Now, if you were voting from the age of 5, that would maybe force people's hands. Look, this probably isn't going to happen, is it? But you see the point. Do people talk about it enough?
I think unless you're interested in politics yourself or have a family that are, then it's hard to find places such as podcast where you can actually talk about it a lot. So it's really easy to then accept those small things if you're not educated on it from an early age.
What 14, 15-year-olds, right? We can generalise here. How interested are they?
Not all. Very, very rare if people our age are interested in politics.
Then so, year 12, 13 age? Generally, we're generalising here.
Start to get a bit more interested, a bit more aware, but the kind of in-depth knowledge that you guys have is not really. You know, it's just a bit. It's mainly limited to I've read this on Instagram, and you know, from Fact Check Politics. Everybody loves Fact Check Politics, and it's nothing really above that.
Mr Cook, how does that bear out in the rest of the population, do you think? I mean, young people, you might say, then not interested in politics. Is that hugely different to the adult population, do you think?
Probably not to the extent, it probably surprise you, right, the amount of people that are adults that aren't actually that interested. So I think half the time with adults, it's as soon as an issue becomes relevant to them, right? So there was this big obsession with, like, Brexit, which drove a lot of people back then. But then you look at, like, the Major years and even the Blair years, and there was this kind of that's what I'm looking for. It wasn't that people weren't necessarily interested, but there wasn't much for them to complain about, if you know what I mean. Everything, the economy was running smoothly, NHS was fully stocked, schools seemed okay, and it wasn't until you get to the 08 crash that all of a sudden you see this big political fervour come back to the fore again, die down a bit under the coalition, come back again when Brexit comes up. That up and down wave. I remember being in sixth form, that was like my political. I was a right little Marxist back then. You remember, like, I was a...
You weren't indeed a little Marxist, that's what I wrote down in my...
But yeah, that was when I started to become aware of stuff, I think, really.
Yeah, I mean, and that's to be expected. I'm not expecting all 13, 14, 15-year-olds to wander around having in-depth conversations about voting behaviour on the corridors, so they'll be quite nice from time to time. But, I suppose, okay, so one reason why generally people won't be that interested some of the time is when things are going well, there's no real urgency to care.
And I think adults also, with the stakes are much higher. So this isn't me getting at children, but obviously your parents pay the bills, go shopping, all this stuff, whereas adults have to take that on for themselves. When you're looking at your income every month and realising, oh, this is impeding on this a little bit, then obviously you react a bit more, don't you?
Yeah, so it's different, isn't it, for different things that affect different age groups. Okay, 5-year-olds voting, it's a thought experiment. 16-year-olds, though. Isla, should 16-year-olds have the vote?
Personally, yes, because, I mean, if you're looking at Finn, so you're likely not to vote for this next one, which means that you're going to be another 3 or 4 years older than 18. So I think it would work out that you're probably going to be around 18 anyways when you do vote. I think...
Yeah, I suppose you can get, if you do miss out you could theoretically get to the age of 22, 23 and not ever having been able to cast a vote.
Exactly, and that's not right. Because I talked to... At COP, I met the Scottish Education Minister, Shirley-Ann Somerville, and she's been a big advocate for votes at 16, but they've actually done it in Scotland. And so what they do there is they bring politics into the classroom and they talk about it, because obviously, you'll still be at school when you start voting. So political awareness is a much bigger thing in Scotland than it is here, because... Well, it's more relevant, it's not like, oh, it's 18, that's ages away. It's more here and now. So, yeah, I mean, I'd completely agree with the idea of votes at 16. It makes sense.
Yeah, I think a big problem in politics is that a lot of the MPs, particularly people running for Prime Minister, are in their 50s or 60s, and it's very rare that you'll find MPs such as Aspanna Begum who are actually young, such as 30s, and who are for young people and giving them a voice. So I think... it's difficult to be interested in something that it seems that nobody cares about you being interested in.
That's a great point, yeah.
You're 16, it puts the onus on you to...
So, would it...
mind.
Ideally, then, would you like younger MPs or younger people who...
Yeah, I think there's all sorts surrounding how old MPs are and who gets into being a politician, but I think that if people are younger when they get in, then I think you're more likely to be engaged in it because these people are people who may have the same issues as you, so it affects you more, so it makes you more interested because it is for you and about you.
We quite like controversial ideas on here, so I was just thinking as you were speaking then, Eva, what about an age limit then? So once you pass a certain age, that's it?
I mean, eventually it will be our world and... our teachers will have passed, and especially the very elderly people who, just to generalise, may vote Tory, or at least the ones I know, they're going to be dead soon, and then we're stuck in a government that we don't want. So I think if you lower the voting age, then you can vote for what you will have as you grow up, which I think is more important than the people who will not need it soon.
Would lowering the voting age energise younger people a bit more?
Yeah.
You think? You think you've got more, you're actually perhaps being listened to or being given more of a stake?
Yeah.
Yeah? And I think that's interesting. I think, rowing back on something I suggested earlier, I don't think we should do less or no political education. In fact, the opposite. I think that's I was trying to explain that's the reason why there's a big thing about potential influencing. But if you don't do it in schools and people aren't talking about it at homes, then where do people get their knowledge from? So maybe that's an area we need to look at broadly across the country in terms of educating younger people. I think the 16-year-old votes debate is potentially one that might get more traction at some point. Perhaps not yet. Mr. Cook, do you agree? Do you think it's got a possibility?
I think there's a chance, especially given, like you said, Finn, that Scotland's already done it. I don't know what the appetite is in Wales. I don't know if the Labour government down there is saying much.
They've got the power to do it.
Good point. Probably not, actually. But I think if, let's say the next election goes Labour SNP coalition, you could easily see it.
Political parties, it's like votes for women, really, in suffragettes, and they tend to move when they realise they'll benefit from it.
Exactly.
So, look, loads of women will vote for us, give them the vote, I mean, it wasn't as purely cynical as that, but it was part of the reason.
Yeah, definitely.
It was absolutely part of the reason. And it would be the same for if they widen the franchise now and they brought it down to 16. It's like, oh, hang on a minute. So you run like, I mean, you said you were generalising. I think you're pretty accurate in the sense it's called the grey vote, which is the retired vote. It is more conservative. It's just the way it goes, and the younger vote is less conservative. But we've discussed a few things here. Another reason that potentially puts people off is younger people, if they're voting for a party that doesn't get in, they don't see a connection between their vote and actually somebody in power. So you could give the votes for young people, you could make them count more, like a weighting system.
I think young people, not you guys necessarily, you guys are all politically, aware, but I think it always fascinated me that the referendum was basically lost by a bunch of students at Glastonbury. On the day of the election in 2019, tons of students were off at festivals. And it makes me think, well, if you're that bothered about keeping out Theresa May, maybe you should sack off Glastonbury this one year.
It's a funny thing when you look at turnout in elections, and it's always a struggle to get. And is it the 18 to 30 bracket that they measure it in, or 18 to 25?
I think
or
it's
something?
like 18-24.
Yeah, 18-24. And it is. You would hope that it would be higher, but there's clearly reasons for that. Some of them we have discussed today. I think we've got a few minutes left, and there's tons of issues on voting behaviour. We've just scratched the surface. Let's discuss people why. We know that why to vote. We know that perhaps as yet you can't quite exercise your vote, but I'm guessing as soon as you get the chance you will. And you do get, it's more than just a general election, you get to vote in all different types of election. Why? Why should people vote? What do we think? What's the most important reason why you need to vote?
Well, there's always that thing, isn't there? If you don't vote, then you lose the right to complain. It's about saying, yes, all right, one vote might not be that much, and see if 40 odd million votes. It's not, one vote in itself isn't going to make all the difference in the world, but it's still important. Basically, it's so important to vote because it's about having that. I'd say it's your societal duty. It's your duty as a citizen to vote, because then it's like then you have your say basically. And if something doesn't go your way, then it's your fault. And then if something that it's just
you're involved in that to an extent, aren't you? Eva, what do you think?
Yeah, I think if I've lost what I was going to say. I think it's really important that if you have that mentality of my vote won't count, well, what if everyone else has that mentality? Then we could end up in a dictatorship, and I think it's really important that everyone exercises their right to vote. And I think that one of the big factors in why 16-year-olds don't get to vote is because our current party in power, the Conservatives, I think that Gen Z particularly, the new generations emerging, they will definitely, to generalise, not align with Conservatives as much as the older generations have. And I think there's definitely that fear of, well, if we give these 16-year-olds the right to vote, we might not get into power because there's so many of them. So I think it's really important that
there's tension there, isn't there, between generations? So that was a really interesting point. Either anything to add here? Why to vote?
I agree with Eva that everyone can't think my vote won't matter because then no one would vote, and I think that then leads into tactical voting. Do I vote for one party because they're going to definitely beat the party that I don't like, or do I vote for the party that I personally want? And it's like you vote for the party. If you vote for the party you want, then that creates more change than you think. They'll be more motivated. They might get some more funding and from people in general. And I think that there's conformity, which is not a good thing necessarily, or it's not a good thing at all. Where you just vote because that everyone else votes for that, and that.
I think you've raised some fantastic points. Just a couple of things I'd sort of like to pick out from there. I really like that you were almost framing it as a responsibility to vote. I think people have this apathy to say, well, it's my right not to vote. It's like, I think perhaps you need to reframe that and say, well, we've all got a responsibility, because that, you know, if we don't
It's
vote,
our world.
Yeah, exactly.
We should care.
And do you just want to give over everything to someone just to rule the country for you, which is, and you use the word dictatorship, it's going towards that, isn't it? Yeah, there's loads of issues how we could sort of look at voting differently. And then Ali, when you mentioned, you know, you might not realise it, but, you know, voting for a particular party, as it is, can generate change. It is one of the few ways. It's hard to see change. It's hard to see where change comes from. But if we don't vote, then the change that happens might not be something that you like or not. So, loads of issues there, loads of problems, loads of things we could do better. I'm trying to think how schools can do better in education to try to encourage people to vote and think about voting, and loads of different things. So thank you, everyone. Thank you. Do you enjoy your first experience of Bingley Talks Politics? First of many, we hope. So thank you to all involved. Thank you for listening. And there'll be our final episode of the half term next week.
Absolutely.
Cheers all. Thank you.
Thank you.